Long before the borders, before the word Nigeria ever existed, this vast land was home to some of Africa's earliest civilizations, societies that thrived on ingenuity, trade, art, and spiritual belief. The story of Nigeria begins not with conquest or colonization, but with the rhythm of people who shaped the land through thousands of years of adaptation and creativity. Archaeologists trace human life in this region back tens of thousands of years. Early hunter-gatherer communities left behind stone tools scattered across the savannas and river valleys. But it was around 1000 BCE that one of Africa's most intriguing ancient cultures emerged, the Nok civilization. Discovered in the early 20th century by tin miners in central Nigeria, the Nok left behind mysterious terracotta sculptures unlike anything else in West Africa. Their artwork, elongated faces, intricate hairstyles, and expressive eyes, revealed a society rich in symbolism and skill. Yet these were not merely artists. The Nok were among the earliest known iron smelters south of the Sahara. Long before much of Europe entered the Iron Age, the Nok forged tools and weapons, transforming agriculture and warfare. Their mastery of iron technology gave rise to growing communities that would influence later civilizations across the region. By 300 CE, the Nok had faded from history, their cities buried under centuries of soil. But their legacy survived, in the languages, myths, and metallurgical traditions of the peoples who came after. From these ancient foundations, Nigeria's mosaic of cultures began to take form. As centuries unfolded, kingdoms rose and fell. The land became a crossroads of empires, each leaving a mark on what would one day become the largest nation in Africa. To the north, where the Sahel meets the Sahara, the vast grasslands gave birth to powerful city-states and empires that thrived on trade. Caravans moved across the desert, carrying salt, leather, gold, and slaves. Ideas, too, traveled these routes, and among them came one that would transform northern Nigeria forever: Islam. By the 11th century, the Kanem-Bornu Empire had risen near Lake Chad, one of the oldest and longest-lasting empires in African history. Its rulers, known as the Mais, embraced Islam early, making their court a center of scholarship and administration. Under Maidana Madabalemi in the 13th century, Kanem-Bornu expanded its influence over a vast region, reaching into what is now Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. The empire was organized, bureaucratic, and deeply connected to the trans-Saharan trade. Scholars in its capital, Ngazagamu, wrote in Arabic, studied law and astronomy, and maintained contact with North African centers of learning like Timbuktu and Cairo. The wealth of Kanem-Bornu came not just from conquest but from control of trade, of routes, and of ideas. Further west, the Hausa city-states, including Kano, Katsina, Zaria, and Gobia, emerged between the 10th and 15th centuries. Each city was a fortified hub of craft, commerce, and governance. They shared language, culture, and Islam, yet competed fiercely for dominance. Kano became renowned for its indigo-dyed cloth and bustling markets. Katsina grew into a seat of scholarship, attracting travelers and intellectuals from across West Africa. Through diplomacy, intermarriage, and trade, these northern kingdoms sustained complex systems of governance long before any European power arrived. Their records, often written in Arabic, provide some of the earliest written documentation of Nigeria's history. Farther south, in the forested lands of the West, another world thrived, the realm of the Yoruba peoples. Their origin myths speak of Ile-Ife, the sacred city where the god Oduduwa descended from the heavens to create humanity. Whether myth or memory, Ife was indeed a cradle of Yoruba civilization, flourishing between the 11th and 15th centuries. Ife's artisans created bronze and terracotta heads so lifelike that early European archaeologists refused to believe they were of African origin. Each sculpture represented rulers, priests, and deities, blending realism with spiritual idealism. Ife was not only a religious center but a sophisticated urban state with organized government and artistic excellence that rivaled that of ancient Greece or Benin. From Ife's legacy rose the Oyo Empire, which would dominate much of the region from the 15th to the 18th century. Oyo built its power on cavalry and trade. Its vast plains allowed the use of horses imported from the north, giving its warriors mobility and strength. The Alafin of Oyo, the supreme ruler, presided over a structured political system with checks and balances, including the Oyo Messi, a council of chiefs that could even compel a ruler to abdicate. Its governance system became a model of organized rule and accountability, proof of Africa's political sophistication long before colonial intervention. To the southeast of Oyo, another powerful kingdom emerged, Benin, ruled by the Yoruba and located in what is now Edo State. By the 13th century, Benin had become one of the most advanced political and artistic centers in Africa. Its walled city, surrounded by a vast system of moats and earthworks stretching hundreds of kilometers, astonished early European visitors. Benin's administration was centralized, disciplined, and efficient. The Yoruba ruled through a hierarchy of chiefs responsible for military, economic, and spiritual affairs. The city itself was a masterpiece of urban planning, with broad streets leading to the royal palace, a sprawling complex filled with carved ivory, coral, and brass. But it was the Benin bronzes that immortalized the kingdom's legacy. Cast using the lost wax technique, these detailed plaques and sculptures depicted scenes of court life, warfare, and mythology. When Europeans first saw them, they were stunned by their realism and craftsmanship, art that defied colonial stereotypes of African primitivism. From the late 15th century, Benin opened contact with the Portuguese. The two powers traded goods, pepper, ivory, textiles, and later, slaves. Yet Benin maintained strict control over foreign access, never allowing Europeans to colonize or interfere in its affairs for centuries. The kingdom's wealth and discipline became a beacon of African independence, until the late 19th century, when British imperial ambition would finally bring its downfall. In the eastern regions, the Igbo developed a different kind of political organization. Unlike the centralized kingdoms of the north and west, Igbo communities were largely acephalous, meaning they lacked kings or hereditary rulers. Instead, governance was based on councils of elders, secret societies, and communal decision-making. This system emphasized equality, consensus, and accountability. Yet this decentralized structure did not mean disunity. By the 17th century, a powerful network known as the Aro Confederacy emerged. Centered in the town of Arachukwu, the Aro built a vast trade network across the region, linking communities from the Niger Delta to the Cross River. Their spiritual authority revolved around the Abini Ukpabi Oracle, a religious institution that wielded immense influence. The Aro controlled trade in slaves, palm oil, and other goods, working in tandem with coastal middlemen who dealt directly with Europeans. Their reach extended far beyond their immediate territory, making the Aro Confederacy one of the most dynamic indigenous systems in pre-colonial Nigeria. The year was 1472 when the first Portuguese sailors arrived on the Nigerian coast. Drawn by tales of gold and exotic lands, they sailed along the Niger Delta, trading copper, cloth, and beads for ivory, pepper, and later, human lives. Over the next few centuries, European ships would transform Nigeria's coast into one of the busiest hubs of the Atlantic slave trade. Ports like Bonny, Calabar, and Lagos became centers of commerce and suffering. European traders rarely ventured inland. Instead, they relied on African middlemen who captured and sold slaves from rival regions. It was a brutal economy that pitted communities against one another and reshaped societies from within. The kingdoms of Oyo, Benin, and the Aro Confederacy all became entangled in the trade, each balancing profit, morality, and survival. Over time, millions of Africans, men, women, and children, were forced from their homes, shipped across the Atlantic, and sold into bondage in the Americas. The human cost was staggering. Entire generations disappeared. Populations declined. Traditional systems fractured under the pressure of violence and greed. The coastal towns flourished economically, but the soul of the land bore deep scars that would echo for centuries. By the late 18th century, winds of change began to blow across the Atlantic. In Britain, abolitionist movements gained momentum. The moral outrage against slavery grew, and by 1807, the British Parliament officially abolished the transatlantic slave trade. Yet, the abolition did not mean the end of exploitation, it merely changed its form. British ships now patrolled the West African coast under the banner of anti-slavery, but their motives soon became clear. They sought not just to end the slave trade, but to control the commerce that replaced it. Palm oil, used to lubricate the engines of the Industrial Revolution, became the new black gold. Nigeria's rivers and deltas were once again at the heart of global trade. Missionaries arrived, bringing Christianity and Western education. They built schools, churches, and printing presses, often clashing with traditional beliefs. At the same time, British merchants established trading posts and pressured local rulers into signing treaties of protection. Step by step, the British presence deepened, turning commerce into conquest. By the dawn of the 19th century, the political and spiritual landscapes of what would become Nigeria were in turmoil and transformation. Old kingdoms were weakening, new powers were emerging, and across the horizon came the shadow of a foreign empire, one that spoke of civilization and trade, but sought domination and control. Britain, now the most powerful maritime nation in the world, turned its attention toward the Niger region. The justification was noble in rhetoric, the fight against the slave trade, but beneath it lay a hunger for markets, territory, and resources. Before British conquest could take hold, a revolution was already reshaping northern Nigeria. In 1804, a scholar and reformer named Usman Dan Fodio led a jihad against the Hausa rulers, whom he accused of corruption and moral decay. His movement was both religious and social, an effort to purify Islam and establish justice. The uprising swept across the north, toppling long-standing kingdoms and uniting them under a new Islamic state, the Sokoto Caliphate. Centered in Sokoto, the Caliphate became one of the largest empires in Africa, stretching from modern Niger to Cameroon. Its system of governance was based on Islamic law, education, and scholarship. Cities like Kano and Zaria thrived as centers of learning and trade. For nearly a century, the Caliphate maintained peace, prosperity, and order. But it was also built on a strict social hierarchy and the use of slavery as a labor system. This contradiction, a pious empire sustained by bondage, would later be exploited by European colonizers to justify their own rule. By the late 19th century, the Sokoto Caliphate was still strong, but its independence was about to end. Throughout the 1800s, British merchants and missionaries crept deeper into the Niger Basin. Companies like the Royal Niger Company, granted royal charter by the British Crown, became the spearhead of imperial expansion. Its agents were not soldiers but traders, backed by gunboats and treaties written in English that few local rulers could read or fully understand. One by one, coastal territories fell under British protection. The Oil Rivers Protectorate, established in 1884, covered much of the Niger Delta. In 1861, the port city of Lagos was annexed outright after years of tension between local rulers and British traders. What began as commercial outposts soon turned into the machinery of empire. The British claimed to bring order to chaotic trade, but their methods were ruthless. When local chiefs resisted signing treaties or interfered with British interests, they were removed by force. Entire communities were bombarded, their towns burned, their leaders exiled or executed. It was conquest disguised as progress. In 1885, European powers gathered in Berlin to divide Africa among themselves in what became known as the Berlin Conference. Not a single African leader was invited. Lines were drawn across maps by men who had never seen the lands they claimed. Britain, eager to secure its share, was awarded vast territories around the Niger River, a patchwork of kingdoms, caliphates, and villages that would later be merged into a single entity called Nigeria. The Benin Empire, which had once controlled trade on the western coast, resisted British encroachment longer than most. The Oba of Benin, Ovenramwa Nobezi, maintained limited contact with European traders but forbade them from entering his domain without permission. His control over ivory and palm oil trade threatened British merchants who wanted free access. In 1897, under the pretext of punishing Benin for the deaths of a British delegation, Britain launched the punitive expedition. Thousands of troops invaded the city, looted its treasures, and set it ablaze. The Yoruba was captured and exiled. Benin's bronze masterpieces, centuries of cultural heritage, were shipped to Britain, scattered across European museums, where many remain to this day. The destruction of Benin was more than a military conquest. It was the symbolic death of one of Africa's most sophisticated civilizations. The message was clear: resistance to empire would be crushed without mercy. By the early 1900s, Britain had conquered nearly all the territories that now form Nigeria. In the north, British forces subdued the Sokoto Caliphate and the Bornu Kingdom, exploiting divisions and using modern weaponry against armies armed with spears and swords. By 1903, the Caliphate had fallen. Its leaders surrendered, and the British declared victory. To the south, the Royal Niger Company was dissolved, and its lands were transferred to the British government. The Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria were officially established. The Niger Delta and Lagos were consolidated under British colonial administration. But managing these vast regions proved costly. The north was large and sparsely populated, while the south was rich in resources and European contact. To save money and simplify rule, in 1914, British Governor Frederick Luggard merged them into a single entity, the Colony and Protectorate of Nigeria. The name Nigeria had been coined just a few years earlier by Flora Shaw, a British journalist and later Luggard's wife. Derived from a Niger River, it reflected nothing of the region's diversity or history. With a stroke of the pen, over 250 ethnic groups, Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, Edo, Tiv, Ijaw, Fulani, and many more, were bound into one artificial nation. Unlike the French, who imposed direct control, the British preferred a policy of indirect rule. They governed through existing traditional authorities, especially in the north, where emirs and chiefs were co-opted into the colonial system. These rulers collected taxes, enforced British laws, and maintained order on behalf of the crown. In the north, this system was effective, as pre-existing hierarchies made it easy to integrate. But in the south, where societies like the Igbo were decentralized, indirect rule clashed with local traditions. British officials created warrant chiefs, men appointed by the colonial government who often lacked legitimacy within their own communities. This sowed resentment and rebellion, most famously in the Aba Women's Revolt of 1929, when thousands of women protested against unfair taxation and the abuse of power by warrant chiefs. Colonial rule reshaped Nigeria's social and economic landscape. The British built railways and ports, but primarily to extract resources: palm oil, cocoa, tin, and later, crude oil. Education was introduced but limited, designed to produce clerks and interpreters rather than leaders. The wealth of the land flowed outward to London, while most Nigerians remained in poverty. Despite the oppression, colonialism also created unexpected connections. For the first time, people from different regions, north and south, Igbo and Hausa, Yoruba and Tiv, found themselves under one administration, however unequal. Roads, newspapers, and schools slowly built a shared consciousness. By the 1920s and 1930s, a new class of educated Nigerians began to emerge. They studied in mission schools, some abroad in Britain and America, and returned with ideas of self-determination and freedom. Among them was Herbert Macaulay, often called the father of Nigerian nationalism. In 1923, he founded the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP, the first political organization to challenge colonial rule. Through newspapers like the Lagos Daily News, Macaulay and others exposed corruption, protested unfair policies, and demanded representation. Their voices inspired a generation of activists who would later lead Nigeria to independence. At the same time, trade unions, student groups, and religious movements began to organize. In cities like Lagos and Ibadan, Nigerians debated democracy, socialism, and Pan-Africanism, ideas that were transforming colonies across Africa and the Caribbean. The dream of self-government had begun to take root. When World War II broke out in 1939, tens of thousands of Nigerians fought for the British Empire, from North Africa to Burma. They returned home with a new sense of confidence and awareness. They had fought for freedom abroad. Now they wanted it at home. The war also weakened Britain. Its empire, once vast and unshakable, was crumbling under the cost of global conflict. Across Africa, nationalist movements gained momentum. Britain could no longer rule through force alone. In 1946, the Richards Constitution introduced limited regional representation, but real power remained in colonial hands. It was a token gesture, enough to appease, not to liberate. The next decade, however, would see Nigeria's political awakening explode into full force. The dawn of Nigerian independence brought an air of optimism that swept across the land. A new generation of leaders, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and Obafemi Awolowo, emerged as political titans, each representing the aspirations of their regions and the promise of a united federation. Yet, beneath the bright flags and national anthems, the foundations of that unity were already trembling. The new Nigeria was not a nation born from shared history, but from colonial borders that forced hundreds of ethnicities into one fragile house. At independence in 1960, Azikiwe became Governor General, later the first president. Balewa, the dignified teacher from the north, was Prime Minister. And Awolowo, the visionary from the west, championed education and development. Together, they stood as symbols of a hopeful federation. But their unity was uneasy. Each man was bound to his region's priorities, and Nigeria's federal structure magnified those rivalries. The Northern People's Congress, the Action Group, and the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons became not platforms of ideology, but regional armies in political disguise. As oil was discovered in the Niger Delta, power struggles intensified. Elections turned violent, corruption spread, and trust between the regions with it. By 1966, the fragile republic had reached its breaking point. On a January morning in 1966, young military officers struck. They assassinated Balewa, Ahmadu Bello, and other key figures, claiming to purge corruption and save the nation. But their revolution unleashed the demons of division. Major General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, the highest-ranking officer, assumed control, promising unity and reform. Yet his decision to abolish the federal system in favor of centralized rule terrified the North, who saw it as an Igbo attempt at domination. 6 months later, Northern officers retaliated in a brutal counter-coup. Ironsi was murdered, and massacres of Igbo civilians erupted across the North. By late 1966, the idea of one Nigeria hung by a thread. In May 1967, the Eastern region, led by Colonel Ojimegwu Ojukwu, declared independence as the Republic of Biafra. Nigeria was plunged into a devastating civil war. For 30 brutal months, the country tore itself apart. Entire towns vanished, families fled, and famine consumed the land. The haunting images of skeletal children, victims of blockade and starvation, burned into the world as conscience. Over 1 million lives were lost before Biafra finally surrendered in 1970. When victory came, the federal leader General Yakubu Gowon declared no victor, no vanquished, urging reconciliation. But beneath the call for peace lay a wounded nation, divided, traumatized, yet determined to rebuild. The 1970s brought oil wealth, rivers of money that could have rebuilt the nation. Nigeria joined OPEC and became a key player in global energy markets. The skyline of Lagos rose, new universities and highways appeared. Yet prosperity proved fleeting. The oil boom fed corruption and greed. Government officials enriched themselves while the gap between rich and poor widened. For every road built, another village sank into neglect. The military, seeing itself as the only force capable of holding Nigeria together, entrenched its power. In 1975, General Gowon was overthrown in a bloodless coup. His successor, General Murtala Mohammed, inspired the nation with bold reforms and the cry for change with immediate effect. But his life was cut short by assassination in 1976. General Olusegun Obasanjo took over, continuing Murtala's reforms and, in a rare act of statesmanship, returned power to civilians in 1979. The Second Republic, led by President Shehu Shagari, began with high hopes. But as oil prices collapsed, corruption returned, dragging the nation into debt and disillusionment. By 1983, the military struck again. Major General Muhammadu Buhari seized power, vowing to restore discipline. His regime imposed austerity and censorship, ruling with severity but failing to heal the economy. Just 2 years later, he too was ousted by his army chief, General Ibrahim Babangida. Charismatic and cunning, Babangida liberalized the economy and promised a democratic transition. Promises that evaporated in 1993 when he annulled what was widely seen as Nigeria's fairest election, won by Mashood Abiola. The nation erupted in protest. Democracy had been strangled once more. In the chaos that followed, General Sani Abacha seized power in November 1993. His rule was marked by repression, fear, and staggering corruption. Political opponents vanished, journalists were jailed, and executions silenced dissent. Among the most haunting voices was that of Ken Saro-Wiwa, the environmental activist who dared to challenge both the regime and oil giants over pollution in the Niger Delta. In 1995, he and 8 Ogoni activists were executed, their deaths sending shockwaves across the world. Nigeria became isolated, suspended from the Commonwealth, condemned by nations that once celebrated its independence. Yet resistance refused to die. In homes and churches, in universities and streets, people whispered the same word, freedom. Then, in 1998, fate intervened. Abacha died suddenly in office, and within months, Mashood Abiola II was gone. Their death symbolized the end of one era and the fragile birth of another. In 1999, under General Abdolsalami Abubakar's brief interim rule, Nigeria prepared for transition once more. Elections were held, and Olusegun Obasanjo, the former military ruler turned civilian statesman, was elected president. On May 29, 1999, as he took the oath of office, Nigeria entered the Fourth Republic, a rebirth long overdue. Obasanjo's government pursued economic reform, fought corruption, and rebuilt ties with the world. Nigeria's foreign debt was reduced, its global image revived. But old wounds persisted. Poverty, inequality, and ethnic mistrust shadowed every achievement. The Niger Delta, exploited yet impoverished, erupted in militancy. Groups demanded justice, sabotaging pipelines and clashing with security forces. At the same time, in the far north, a darker threat was brewing, the rise of Boko Haram. Founded in the early 2000s, Boko Haram began as a radical religious movement. After the death of its founder Mohammed Yusuf in 2009, it transformed into a violent insurgency that would claim tens of thousands of lives. Cities burned. Markets turned to ashes. The abduction of 276 Chibok schoolgirls in 2014 horrified the world, sparking the global campaign #BringBackOurGirls. President Goodluck Jonathan, who had risen from humble roots in the Niger Delta, struggled to contain the crisis. Meanwhile, corruption and economic stagnation eroded his popularity. In 2015, Nigerians voted for change, and history took a poetic turn. Muhammadu Buhari, once a military ruler, returned as a democratically elected president. For the first time, power had transferred peacefully between rival parties. It was a moment of political maturity that signaled democracy might finally be taking root. Today, Nigeria is a land of contrasts, immense wealth beside deep poverty, modern skyscrapers beside villages unchanged for centuries. Yet it is also a nation of extraordinary resilience. Its youth, creative, outspoken, and connected, are redefining Nigeria's image. Through music, film, and technology, they are reclaiming the narrative once told by outsiders. Afrobeats has become a global language. Artists like Burna Boy and Wizkid fill stadiums across continents. Nollywood produces thousands of films a year, making Nigeria one of the world's cultural powerhouses. And from Lagos's tech hubs, startups are transforming finance and communication across Africa. In 2020, the hashtag #EndSARS movement shook the nation, a youth-led protest against police brutality that evolved into a broader demand for justice and accountability. Though the movement was met with violence, it revealed a generational awakening, a new Nigeria rising from the frustrations of the old. Nigeria's journey is one of paradoxes, chaos and creation, failure and faith. It is a story of kingdoms lost and empires reborn, of soldiers and civilians, poets and protesters, each carving their mark upon the same restless soil. From the ancient city walls of Benin to the oil rigs of the Delta, from the dusty plains of the Sahel to the neon skylines of Lagos, Nigeria has never ceased to reinvent itself. Its greatest power has never been oil, or armies, or politicians, but its people, resilient, ingenious, and defiant. For every coup, there was a song. For every famine, a story. For every fall, a rising again. The past still echoes, the wars, the struggles, the dreams deferred. But the future belongs to those who refuse to forget yet dare to imagine anew. Because Nigeria is not merely a nation. It is an idea, vast, flawed, unyielding, forever reaching toward what it could become. And that story, still unfolding, is far from over.